Well, but Atlanta has to be determined to win a few games here, huh? It takes determination and talent to make it to the big leagues. But the competition is tough, not just on the field. Bob Brown is going to introduce you to a woman who earned her stripes not on the diamond, but behind the microphone.
She is a former Broadway musical star and nightclub singer who became the first woman ever to do Major League Baseball play-by-play on television, a job she clung to even when her own life was in the balance. And if that sounds melodramatic, it's all been part of the game to which Suzyn Waldman was first introduced as a child. Play ball! She developed a passion for baseball that began nearly 50 years ago when her grandfather took her to a game at Fenway Park in her hometown of Boston.
I was 3.5 years old, and just the smells and the sounds, and maybe it was holding my grandfather's hand and being there, but I just fell in love with baseball. It just looked beautiful to me, and the grass and what was going on, and just loved it. I loved everything about it.
She remembers seeing Ted Williams in the on-deck circle and thinking, if God were a person, that's what he'd look like. But her mom, she says, told her she couldn't grow up to be Ted Williams. So at home she played Cinderella and developed into an exceptional singer whose voice was compared to Barbra Streisand's. On the New York cabaret circuit at places like Gypsy's and Reno Sweeney's, you could always hear a baseball song among her ballads.
And there used to be a ballpark where the field was warm and green.
She cultivated her love of baseball even when she co-starred and toured with Richard Kiley in Man of La Mancha, by volunteering to sing the national anthem whenever the show played a major league city. Finally, she gave in to the call.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first broadcast of WFAN All Sports 1050.
In 1987, after taking a series of journalism courses, she landed a job with the first all-sports radio station in the country, WFAN in New York. The owner couldn't stand her on the air, she says, so she developed herself as a beat reporter. And the discouraging reception she got there was even written up in a children's book, the Macmillan Book of Baseball Stories. It chronicled one of Suzyn's worst moments in a locker room in the 1980s, when then Toronto Blue Jays outfielder George Bell refused to speak to other members of the media as long as Suzyn was there.
And he saw me coming, and he started screaming the most hideous, awful. I mean, so bad that the clubhouse guys actually went into the other rooms because they couldn't listen to it. It was terrible. And this is the first time this had really ever happened to me, and I felt tears welling up, and I said, oh my gosh, God, just let me get out of here before I start to cry. Don't let anybody see me crying. I'm thinking to myself, please, God, just let me make it to the door. And it was dead silence. I felt like I was in a movie or something. And all of a sudden, I hear, what's her name? And I hear somebody say, it's Suzyn something. And I hear, Suzyn. And I turned around, and it was Jesse Barfield, who was the right fielder, and he said, I went 3 for 5 today. Don't you want to talk to me?
Barfield became an example of the incredible kindness Waldman says she found covering sports, along with the cruelty. She hung in. And over the years, she steadily became a fixture on the media roster, whose specialty was understanding players as performers, something she knew well.
You know what? He's not going to admit that anything hurts. He wants to play and he wants to improve so badly, he won't say anything.
But even in baseball, where the metaphors for life work overtime, it's hard to imagine the mix of miracles and disasters she faced in the 1996 season. The small miracle was in how her work paid off. She was selected to join a group of veteran sportscasters and former players on the MSG network in the television broadcast booth for the New York Yankees. The disaster was that as she prepared to join the team during spring training in 1996, she was told to give up that job of a lifetime, not by one of her bosses, but by her doctors. She had breast cancer.
With oncologists that said, oh, now, sweetheart, this is what we do. You're going to do this, and if you're a good little girl, maybe you can go out to lunch. I fired my first oncologist because he said, this is what we do. And I said, get out of here.
She found a doctor who would treat her while she worked. The job she had just won meant too much to give up. And she refused to change how she worked.
I never sensed any change in her approach to what she did, still to this day. I mean, she's just a survivor. Suzyn was just, out there doing her job, and she didn't make a big deal out of it at all.
So you feel sick? So what? You feel sick. If I could be there so that one woman doesn't sit in her house and feel sorry for herself and think, gosh, I'm going to die, I can't do this. It was really important. And, to get through it, you can get through it.
On the road, the team trainers stored her medication in clubhouses and on planes in ice chests. Divorced after an 11-year marriage, she kept a schedule that revolved totally around baseball, even with her life in the balance. She was as determined as any player never to show when she was hurt, or to let her guard down in front of people. She only did that well out of sight when she went home at the end of the day to her animals.
You can let things out with animals, and they're not going to hurt you. They're not going to tell anybody, My older dog isn't going to tell anybody that I sat in my room and cried for 6 hours. Or one day during chemo, I sat in that bathroom for 12 hours and never moved because I was throwing up every hour. She sat with me. You're not going to get a person to do that. Sat right there, 12 hours, didn't move. From about 6 in the morning till 6 at night.
She wore wigs until she grew her hair back and hardly missed a beat on her job. Many of the players did look after her, including the slugger Darryl Strawberry, whose troubled career had been revived by the Yankees. And among this group she compares to a family, she assumed an additional role as cancer affected other members of the organization. She shared vitamin suggestions with manager Joe Torre when he battled prostate cancer as the 1999 season began. And when Darryl Strawberry was diagnosed with colon cancer, Waldman warned about the effects of chemotherapy on a player who had had continuing problems putting his personal life in order.
I went to chemo with him, and Darryl was trying so hard to be brave. Darryl was going to play through chemotherapy. He was going to plead and tell you, I'm feeling fine. Come on, who are you kidding? You feel fine. You got stuff in your vein for an hour, they're putting poison in your vein, and you're fine? I don't think so. When the day I got down there to spring training this year, he had had chemo on a Friday. Saturday, Darryl's in left field in the sun. I said, what are you doing? And he said, what are you talking about? I said, I hit him. You're not supposed to be in the sun for a year. Never mind the next day. I'm all right. Well, he wasn't all right. But he had to have a safe place to tell somebody. You don't want to tell your wife and 2 small children that you're afraid, that you're not going to make a ball team, that you're done, that you're sick. You can't. This is a professional ball player. He's too sick to make the New York Yankees. What's he going to do? Sit in his house?
Waldman still can be a lightning rod for criticism, including charges that she is too soft on the team that ultimately approves the announcers who work the games. But it was her career-long persistence that also made a kind of history. It resulted in ending one of the longest-running feuds in baseball between the principal owner of the Yankees, George Steinbrenner, and the Hall of Fame catcher and former manager, Yogi Berra. The two hadn't spoken since Steinbrenner fired Berra as Yankee manager in 1985. Berra refused even to appear at Yankee Stadium. Waldman thought the feud had gone on long enough and arranged a meeting at Berra's baseball museum.
I was standing behind a post shaking because if it didn't work, I'm watching my career go right down the drain here because these 2 guys could have gotten in a room by themselves and started screaming, and George could have walked out the back door. Nobody would have known. Mr. Steinbrenner, you remember Mr. Berra? Mr.
Yes,
Berra,
we
you
remember
Mr. Steinbrenner?
It was a scoop that amazed the public and her colleagues.
I was driving in the car, listening to her on the radio with Yogi, and I didn't know anything about it.
I feel very badly about what happened. It was my fault, and I told him I'm very sorry, whatever.
And I got chills because immediately I could envision what that was going to be like.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Yogi Berra!
You didn't have to be a baseball fan to appreciate what came out of it. A full stadium, a day devoted to Yogi Berra's emotional return. And as if the fates were hitting on all cylinders, the Yankees' David Cohn pitched a perfect game. Suzyn Waldman was in the booth, reporting the drama of the game that first had appealed to her as a 3-year-old. Her cancer is under control. Indications are that she'll be back next season, and in the interim, she'll be covering the winter sports. But nothing really competes with baseball in her life. In exchange, she has no weekends, no nightlife, no holidays, and not many second thoughts.
I always thought I'd be married and with my own ball team full of kids. I really did. I thought I'd have 9 sons. That's all I wanted was little boys to play ball with my whole life. Didn't work out that way. Do I think it might be nice if someone took me to dinner? Sure. You know, would I trade it for what I've got? Not a chance. Not a chance.
She's a wonderful success story, no matter who wins the ball games.
Yeah, I just love her moxie. Vigoritas. We'll be right back.